Hello Channel viewers, I am DS, your psychologist, and welcome to another episode on Channel NITT. So our channel has been producing a lot of ENTJ episodes because I'm an ENTJ myself, and recently we have started a tarot and MBTI crossover. So naturally we must talk about ENTJ as one of our first few tarot cards, right? So this is the episode. We are going to talk about the ENTJ as the King of Swords.
Ordained by heaven, this boy is our king.
So this video is going to be broken into 3 segments. In the first segment, I am going to describe the characteristics of the King of Swords and make a comparison between this description with the ENTJ. In our second segment of this video, I am going to talk about the symbolism behind the Rider Waite tarot card of the King of Swords and make a parallel between the King of Swords and the ENTJ. Finally, we are going to make a comparison between the Black Cat's Tarot, King of Swords, and the ENTJ. And as a conclusion, we will talk about how similar the ENTJ is with the parallel, which is the King of Swords in Tarot. So I did some research and found a long list of adjectives that describe the King of Swords as a personality. And they include professional, well-educated, righteous, stern, and firm. So generally as an ENTJ, I do resonate with these adjectives. So it is possible that I sometimes do get influenced by the opinions of others or get swayed by my own emotions, but this is really a very rare occasion. So generally I'm very firm and steadfast in my personal beliefs. So we have just talked about 5 adjectives that describe the King of Swords. So now I am going to come up with a new wave of adjectives. So the King of Swords is also known for his clear thinking. He is able to consider all possible consequences. Not only that, he is sharp, disciplined, and has high ethical standards. So in a lot of our previous episodes, we have already established that ENTJ, being a TE dominant user, really looks into problems from many different perspectives. So this totally tallies with the King of Swords personality type. Personally, I agree with most of the adjectives, except for being disciplined and have high ethical standards. So personally, definitely I have integrity, and I also exercise integrity professionally. So I do not shortchange my students, I do not release them early. So in this case, I am professional and have high ethical standards. However, sometimes I find that I can be rather ruthless and unfeeling. I can hurt people intentionally. So I'm not too sure whether this conflicts with the statement has high ethical standards. Why? Because hurting others may not sound very ethical, right? But I do that. I think ENTJs will do that. But then wait a minute, I have found something on the internet that also describes the King of Swords this way. The King of Swords is known to be very polite in public, but can be very rude to people that he knows. This I totally agree. Another characteristic of the King of Swords is that the King of Swords is usually very truthful and candid about it, and he likes other people to be candid as well.
You're on candid camera.
So far so good. I really think that the adjectives that I use to describe the King of Swords really do resonate with the ENTJ as well. So now let's look at the King of Swords on the Rider Waite. So the Rider Waite is the basic deck of the tarot cards. If you look at the King of Swords over here, you do see a lot of symbolism behind it. The blue tunic in which the King of Swords is wearing is symbolic of spiritual understanding. This is very curious because as an ENTJ, I do find myself very attracted to spirituality. Next, there are butterflies on the back of the throne of the King of Swords. These butterflies represent symbolically transformation and metamorphosis. So the King of Swords is always growing and evolving. Notice that there is a ring on the finger of the left hand of the King of Swords. This represents authority, responsibility, power, and ambition. Of course, in our previous episode with the Queen of Swords, we mentioned that there are clouds in the background, also appear in this picture of the King of Swords. The clouds represent mental challenges. So the King of Swords really like mental challenges. And in this case, it is the same as the ENTJ. At the back of the throne, you will see 2 crescent moons. These 2 crescent moons represent the balance between male and female energies. So this is very interesting because I just got to do this tarot crossover series and I'm very impressed with the resemblance between the ENTJ and the King of Swords. In a lot of our previous episodes, we have already talked about femininity in the ENTJ, and it is also represented on the tarot card. That's not all, the trees in the background represent education. So the King of Swords is holding a double-edged sword in his right hand. So the right hand represents logic. This is because the right hand is controlled by the left brain where logic sits. So if the King of Swords is picked as an advice card, then the advice is usually you need to stick to the facts and be objective. This is a time to exercise logic and not use your emotions. Cut your emotions away. Now back to the double-edged sword. The double-edged sword represents the King of Swords' ability to see and analyze from both sides of a situation. So generally, so far so good. I really think that the resemblance between the ENTJ and the King of Swords is very high to this point. But is there anything more about the King of Swords? Yes, definitely. The King of Swords is supposed to be a person who is committed in relationships but appears to be very independent. That means to say this King of Swords is a committed individual in a relationship but maybe not a very sticky person or not a very loving person.
That's Shakespeare in love.
Because the King of Swords can see deeply into a problem. When in doubt or when you need clarity, you should approach the King of Swords. However, if you look at the picture again, the King of Swords appear to be very distant, aloof and unapproachable. So personally, as an ENTJ, I definitely resonate with the terms aloof, cool and unapproachable. I would rather have people approach me. But if you can enter the world of the King of Swords or the ENTJ and get to know this person better, then you definitely will understand that the King of Swords or the ENTJ is actually a very sociable person. He is going to be committed to his friends and a great friend to be with. If you pick the King of Swords in tarot and you want to ask about career, it usually represents that you're going to have success, especially if you prepare. The King of Swords is actually a very intellectual individual in the entire 16 court cards. So the King of Swords is likely to be a person who is expert in his area. So professions that might be indicated by the King of Swords include lawyers, judges, doctors, surgeons, chefs and pilots. But of course, this does not mean that the ENTJs must gravitate towards this profession. Now we come to the last section. To me, I think that this section is the highlight of the entire video. So for this series, I am using the Black Cat's Tarot to make a comparison between the court card and the MBTI type. And look at the King of Swords in the Black Cat's Tarot. It has so many different elements that you do not see in the original Rider Waite. So let us just look at them and see how they actually add few more dimensions to our understanding of the King of Swords and the ENTJ. First, when I look at this picture, immediately I see that the King of Swords is actually having his foot on some skulls. So what does this stepping on the skull symbolize? First, the King of Swords is not afraid of danger. He is not impulsive though, and he exercises logic when approaching danger. The second thing that I see about this activity of stepping on skulls is that the King of Swords is likely to be a ruthless person. So maybe I envision that this skull belongs to a cat that he has killed. In a lot of popular literature, the ENTJ is really associated with the word ruthless. So it is very possible that the King of Swords has climbed his way by stepping on other people. And he wants the whole world to know that whoever offends him will have the same outcome, die. Next, as you can see in this picture, the King of Swords is actually sharpening his sword, but he has got another sword hidden away on the left of the throne. This itself has many meanings. First, the King of Swords has many backup plans, even though he prefers to use his dominant plan. And this is also true for the ENTJ. However, unlike the INTJ, who is likely to sharpen every knife that he has or every sword that he has, the King of Swords, or the ENTJ in this case, does not do so. Notice that the other sword in the picture has already been covered in a spider web. This really means that the sword is used only as a last resort. Last resort. Anyway, it also has another meaning. This symbolizes the fact that the King of Swords does not bother to hone what he is weak in. So as an ENTJ, this is also very true for myself. I am very aware that I am weak in my introverted feeling and introverted sensing, and I do not bother to hone them or exercise or practice them at all. I just leave them outside or leave them aside. Just like how this King of Swords has left the sword just by the side. So much so that it is attracting cobwebs. The King of Swords in the Rider Waite is holding the sword upright. However, in this picture, you see that the King of Swords is actually sharpening his sword and is no longer holding it upright. This means that the Black Cat's King of Swords is actually more dangerous because he is always ready to strike.
It's dangerous. I'm falling.
Instead of holding his sword on the grip, the King of Swords in this picture is holding the sword on the ricasso. Anyway, the ricasso is the unsharpened length of the blade. So what does this mean? This means that the King of Swords is able to approach a question directly instead of indirectly. Because the King of Swords is so straightforward and direct, sometimes it is really in your face. And that's why a lot of people do not like the King of Swords. Just like many people do not like the ENTJ. The background of this picture shows a dark forest and an uneven terrain. So the King of Swords appears to be enjoying himself in this environment. So there are two things that I pick up. First, the ENTJ is really uncommon and very different from the rest of the other kings. Also, the King of Swords appears to be very willing to venture into the unusual or the unknown, and he appears to be very comfortable doing so. So in our previous episodes, we talked about the Queen of Swords, which is the INTJ, and the Queen of Swords is actually facing the left. And we mentioned that the left represents the past. Here, we see the King of Swords also facing the left. Probably the shadow of the King of Swords is lingering in the past. Symbolically, the King of Swords appears to be wanting to attack somebody from the past. And if I think about it, this is also something true about the ENTJ. In a way, as an ENTJ, I really find it very hard to forget and forgive people who have done me wrong in the past. So symbolically, from this picture, I can actually sense that I am always ready to attack people who have returned. So personally, this is something definitely that resonates with me, but I am not too sure about the other ENTJs. So fellow ENTJs, do you also sometimes feel as if you are always ready to unleash on people who have done you wrong in the past? So do comment below and share with me. So picking the King of Swords as a tarot card when doing a career reading usually symbolizes that success is on the way, or there is going to be some form of a success. However, as a yes-no reading, the King of Swords is usually interpreted as a no.
It's a big fat no from me.
So as an ENTJ, I personally really identify very closely with the King of Swords in tarot. A lot of the characteristics and symbolism in the King of Swords is also really present in the ENTJ himself or herself. So fellow ENTJs, how do you feel about this comparison? Do comment below and share with me as well. Okay, in our upcoming episodes, we will be featuring more MBTI types as a tarot card, and we look forward to see you in those episodes. If you have not subscribed, do consider subscribing so that we can bring you more fun stuff and MBTI. Okay, I'm going to sign off now, and I'll see you in my next episode. Goodbye. Bye bye.